The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Oh, the humanity!
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every
Let us
city.
not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead.
They say that those who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. This is the History Lessons Podcast with certified financial planning practitioner Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor, and your guide to financial wisdom in the past, present, and future. You ready? Good. Let's get historical.
Historical indeed. This is the History Lessons Podcast, and I'm Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor. And in this episode, we talk with Doron Keidar. He's a speaker, a warrior, and an advocate for Israel. He's the host of the aptly named Doron Keidar podcast and currently at work on the I Am Israel project, exploring the most special place on earth to him, the heart of Jerusalem, Mount Zion. He travels globally to advocate for Israel, sharing firsthand insights from his experience defending the Jewish state. Since 2003, Doron has served in a combat unit of the Israeli Defense Forces and has been in the IDF reserves since 2006. With nearly 2 decades of security sector experience, he's contributed to the development of military and law enforcement gear, leveraging his IDF background and collaboration with Israeli and American security experts. Translation: he's a badass. Doron also works with Cry for Zion, a movement supporting Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. Through historical, archaeological, and biblical evidence, he gives audiences a rich perspective on the past, present, and future of Jerusalem. Doron, as you will see in this interview, is a passionate defender of Israel and boots-on-the-ground participant in the most recent war there. Now, you may not agree with his religion or his politics, but you most certainly need to hear what he has to say, because you just might learn something. I sure did. As usual, stay tuned for one major lesson that a modern investor can learn from the current tensions in the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict. Let's get started. Yourself, your background's pretty fascinating from research that I did, stalking you on the internet. Give me a little bit about you and your history.
Well, I guess the short version is that I was born and raised in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
My family originally came from the United States. My father was a World War II vet that basically grew up in a Christian Zionist home, or I don't know if it's a Christian Zionist home, but an affection towards the Jewish people. That he had this basic idea that the Jewish people are special, God's chosen people. And so when word made it to the United States that the Jewish people were being murdered by the Nazis, then my dad actually lied about his age, and he ended up in the Navy at the age of 15. Wow. and spent 3 years in the Marine unit, in the submarine unit. And so he learned electrical engineering, and that's kind of what set him up for when he got back home after the war. Opened up an electric shop in Washington, D.C., where he was selling television sets, the first television sets that were coming from, was it Japan or something like that? Mm-hmm. Like these nice wooden boxes that they had, and so he started with that small business and then eventually got into electrical engineering and ended up coming down to Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and basically was part of the building boom of the 60s, the 70s. Some of the buildings that he had worked on are still standing today. So if anybody knows of the Pier 66 building in Fort Lauderdale, for example, it's got the spiky top and revolving roof. Today it's, I don't know what hotel franchise owns it because it's changed names, but it was originally the Pier 66 for those old timers that know. and different things like that, different government buildings. And then he ended up with a government project, which was one that led him towards Israel. So a good friend of his from the war said, hey, Israel, as you know, fought one of these wars, 67. They won a ton of land, and the Egyptians want their land back, the Sinai back. And so basically, the United States brokered a deal, and I'm looking for contractors that are willing to go and fulfill that contract, which is to build U.S. Bases, military bases at a U.S. standard for Israel. And of course, my dad just jumped on it. He was super excited, and that's what essentially brought him here. He ended up leaving his first wife and leaving his nice home in Fort Lauderdale, right along one of the canals there. The pool, the whole 9 yards. One of those really nice homes they just built, and left his wife behind, left my sister behind, and she had just finished high school, and made it to Israel. And then essentially he met my mom years later, which was also an American. And in between, he had an Israeli wife. And so long story short, met my mom, and we ended up moving to the home that my dad's second wife and him had bought in Kiryat Shmona, which is the very northern part of Israel.
Okay.
And so that's where I ended up growing up. I ended up growing up in Kiryat Shmona, but I was born in Eilat because he was originally put in American, basically American housing for the Americans. Like, had like whole neighborhoods that they built for them in Eilat. So I was born in the very southern part of Israel, but then also ended up being raised in the most northern part of Israel from like the age of like 1.5 or something. So that's
for
what
those of us who don't know, and I'll give you my little story about Israel in a minute, my personal story. But for those of us who don't know much about the country, what's life like growing up in the north?
So I had a very unusual upbringing. Growing up in northern Israel, which today you hear about it on the news, but back then it wasn't as popular frontline news, right? So today you'll hear about, probably more so during this war, where we've been fighting in Gaza and fighting in the north. You hear a little bit more about the north. But essentially, I grew up very similar to the reality that we have in the southern communities that are surrounding the Gaza Strip, which is daily bombardment of rocket fire, mortars, Katyushas that were fired at us from Lebanon. So Hezbollah in 80s, 90s, the Gulf War, okay, we got targeted all the time because of our proximity to the border. So Kiryat Shmona is essentially the largest city on the very northern tip of Israel. And Lebanon is to the cliff side, like it's up cliffs to our west. And so literally they just have to lob the rockets and the mortars and whatever makeshift kind of rocket they can get their hands on, just lob them down into the valley, the Hula Valley, which is where Kiryat Shmona is situated. And because it's the largest city in northern Israel, it is also the reason why it's constantly targeted by the terrorists. The bigger of a target, the easier, the higher chances of getting casualties and so on, because most of these rockets aren't how would you say, they're not smart bombs, okay?
Right.
They're just they
Quite the opposite.
They aim in a general area and they hope to hit civilians and get as many civilian casualties. We also had another reality that I had growing up is we had terrorists from Lebanon that would cross the border. This was like in the late 80s, early 90s, crossed in, committed horrible atrocities. They entered Jewish neighborhoods, raped, murdered, threw babies off of multi-story complexes, because most of the homes in these areas, which are low how to say, they're like a low economy community. They don't have lots of money. They don't buy their own houses, so they live in complexes, right? Is most of the people that live in Kiryat Shmona and in the north in general, and many of these towns. And so, yeah, I mean, entered Ma'alot, just next door to us, entered Kiryat Shmona, and did these kind of atrocities. And that was just kind of like life in Israel. Like that, to me, that was normal. And until I moved to my foster family in Haifa, it was like a culture shock. You know, it's like people were like not concerned about that reality of rocketed or terrorist infiltrations, you know, and that was in 1994. And I remember we moved there just during the Israel's independence, and I remember just the celebrations and all that. So it was about that time, 1994, and shortly within that time period, Rabin was the prime minister, and the theme of that government was peace. Right? It was all about peace. And I remember going to school in Haifa and having a class where they had us write letters, or not a letter, but kind of like like an A4 piece of paper where you write peace, salam, shalom in 3 different languages. And I remember just thinking, are these people mad? Like, what is my teacher like? Is she stupid? Like, does she not understand these people want to kill us? Right. You know, and I just survived the Gulf War, right? In 1991, when we got just pummeled by Iraq and Lebanon at the same time, by the way. So it was, they just joined in and just pummeled us. And I had friends that were killed, fathers of friends, so it was very it was just just hard to believe that there were people in Israel that just they were like on a different planet almost, right? Yeah. Like they were just protected from that kind of reality. So that was my reality.
And it's a great segue. It's a great segue because the peace didn't last. I came through in 2001, so almost 25 years ago, and our aircraft carrier was set to pull into Haifa. We were going to do about 10 days of operational exercises with the IDF. We were going to get to do some flying with their pilots, and somebody set off a bomb in the middle of Jerusalem, and it all got canceled. So I never got to see Israel. I never got to experience Israel. It was the one place really in the Mediterranean in my Navy career that had a pin in it where I really wanted to go, and it got taken away from me because of, again, that cycle of violence. And as you pointed out, it goes all the way back to the late teens. With the Balfour Declaration and the history of Zionism and Israel, and in your case, it goes back to the civil war in Lebanon, where the cycle of violence really ramped up in the 80s and 90s, and is ramping up again, which is one of the reasons we're having this conversation. Highly recommend for folks who don't or haven't read the book. I know Jack Carr. I believe you've been on his podcast. His book about Lebanon and the Marine barracks bombing is fantastic. Everybody should read it and understand what happened there. But talk a little bit about, bring us up to speed in the last 20 years, what you've been doing, and what your projects are now, because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So I guess fast forward to what I've been doing the past, let's say 20 plus years. Started my military service in 2003. I was basically 4 years late from my original original recruitment. It got delayed. It had some family issues, what have you. So once I squared that away, I'd already been married for 3 years, started my military service at 22 years old. and ended up in the Givati Battalion, which is the southern, one of our southern battalions, main southern battalions, combat battalions. And essentially, we were the Gaza unit, or the Gaza battalion. Like Gaza, the whole Gaza Strip was more or less under our charge, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was right around the Second Intifada. And that basically I would say was the beginning of what set me up for my future work, which was doing security. That sent that was the baseline where I got letters sent to me from government agencies saying, hey, you can try out for this and that and the other, whatever. And then one of my good friends from my original platoon, Evgeny, who is one of the top snipers in our battalion during our years of service in Gaza before the pullout in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a legendary sniper, real good friend, and basically he was the one that reached out to me and says, hey, I'm doing this government security, what have you, because I got the letters, but I just kind of ignored them. I wasn't interested at the time. I just wanted to take some time off after my 3 years. And at the time, my wife and I were actually in the process of Jewish conversion. So like I said, I grew up in a Christian home.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the middle of that process, and I wanted to dedicate time to that. And we had a home in Sweden, a beautiful home. And so we were just there, just kind of like recuperating from all this combat and all this fighting in Gaza, what have you, and losing good friends, and just the whole mess of war. And then, yeah, so about let's say a year later, give or take, we made it back to Israel. And then my buddy Evgeny says, hey, I think you're made for this, like this world of security, like this is up your alley kind of thing. Cause he knew me, we were good friends. And I said, fine, why not? Like I'll check it out. So I went to the interviews, did the whole thing, went through the whole process, and eventually ended up landing a job in Jerusalem. So essentially I had to leave where I was living in the north if I wanted to pursue the security career.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose Jerusalem. There's usually like 3 major geographical areas in Israel that have all the security projects, the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so we chose Jerusalem because I was like, you know what? If I'm going to go to a city, I hate the city. I'm a country boy.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I'm going to live in the city, it's going to be Jerusalem. And
if you're going to go big.
Yeah, like I'm going to settle with that because at least there's some kind of historical significance, and
Yeah.
that's always been something that's been a huge interest to me: Bible, history, religion, and all that.
Uh-huh.
So I started my career in Jerusalem back in like the end of 2006, and eventually ended up from just doing like mundane security for government facilities and what have you to going on personal protection projects because of my English. So even though I wasn't trained in that pipeline originally, because there's a whole area where we have like our Secret Service, I didn't do that kind of training, so I didn't have the high-end training, but projects were coming my way because of my language skills. And so my boss basically plugged me into, a project here, a project there. And essentially I segued into personal protection, and that kind of became my niche for many years ever since, working in different companies and essentially going from the government to the private sector, because I realized that basically I had more flexibility with my lifestyle. And that's what I've been doing for just many, many years. Up until lately, I've been working at a company called BHS, which is founded by Israeli Navy SEALs,
Mm-hmm.
the Shaita 13 unit. So a lot of the guys are former Shaita 13, and or all the other tier 1 units in the IDF.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the guys that I work with, that's kind of where we pool our talent from to do personal protection. And I'm basically a team lead that leads most of our high-end projects for our different clients that come from all over the world, which is, the business sector, actors, musicians, what have you. And that's what I've been doing for I guess, 16 years, 17 years, give or take.
So with your background as a security expert, as having a military background as well, in your opinion, what went wrong last October?
Oh, my favorite question on interviews.
Yeah, the softballs are over.
Exactly. I like that. Well, I've done a lot of thinking about it myself, and I would say at the beginning, when you asked me if anybody who was asking me on podcasts and what have you, I was trying to be very careful on what I would say, because you need to let the dust settle. There was a lot of political accusations and what have you, and from the right, from the left, different the different sides that just want to point fingers. But I think most of us, we just wanted to focus on the war, right, and focus on getting our hostages back.
Right.
So really, I didn't care who was at fault. Let's forget that. Let's focus on getting into Gaza as fast as possible, which took over 2 weeks. And let's get our hostages. So was the first thing on my mind, and the only thing on my mind for months. After a while, and after a long time of fighting in Gaza, and listening to all of the different pundits on this issue, I would say, my understanding was, or is, that essentially the security services in Israel, the intelligence community, failed the Israeli people miserably. And I think the best assessments that you can get on this, and that is probably the least bias, is going to be from Caroline Glick. So I highly recommend for your viewers to follow a lot of her content and a lot of her breakdown of what's going on. Essentially, in Israel, you have a very strong clash between the extreme left and right, and where the politics in Israel have shifted drastically, where the right was right politics, but they've shifted to become left, and the left have shifted to become extreme farther left. And so essentially what's happening is the right, trying to make compromise and trying to work with the left and whatever, have basically reached certain serious disagreements, to the point where the far left has taken very extreme measures to make the right government, which has been finally elected after, was it 5 years of elections? I mean, I think it's 4 or 5 years of elections, where we went to the voting ballots, we voted, and there wasn't an agreement, and there wasn't an agreement. I mean, I remember that was like just insane. It was like, we don't have a government, and until you have a formulation of a government, you don't have a budget for the security, for education, for all the areas of importance in Israel. And it actually affected our reserve duty, right? Because the security budget wasn't formulated. So we were losing reserve days where we needed to train, where we needed to prepare for October 7th. And we did prepare for a multi-front war. We knew that this was happening, so we did have that intelligence. We had the big picture. But what happened is we had no clue that something like October 7th would have happened. And essentially what happened is, like I said, people in the high ups in the military, in the high ups in the Shabak, in the high ups in the defense ministry, they withheld information from the prime minister in order to make him look weak, in order to make him fail. And by doing so, without, because like some people say, it was planned and Israel wanted this. Israel did not want this. Neither did the people, in my opinion, who set up this trap for the prime minister wanted it.
Right.
Not the way it panned out. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But they wanted him to fail miserably, and they wanted to withhold certain sensitive information from him. Like, for example, that there was
the problem with the coalition government, right? I think that's what we're talking about, right? Just having those ministers who aren't necessarily on board with your program.
The defense minister that he just fired, for example, for the second time. Because
Right.
the first time he tried to fire him, it led to protests, massive protests in Tel Aviv. And now it led again to massive protests in Tel Aviv. And this is what it's been like for years. It's been protests of, like I said, the far left, which are influenced externally, okay? They're influenced by, I'll just throw one name of the many, George Soros and friends, okay? By people that are external to the government of Israel, that do not like a strong Israel. They don't like a strong government. They want a weak Israel so they can impose their two-state solution. They can impose a Arab Spring, but that it's against Jews. Yeah, these are basically anti-Semites. And now, it's a problem when you bring up a name like George Soros. There have been people that have tried to address him and highlight him, for example, but because he's Jewish, then there's Jews who defend and say, oh, that's anti-Semitism. You guys are attacking him because you're anti-Semites. And I'm like, no, the guys, of all Jews in the world, he does not deserve the right to call himself a Jew, in my opinion, and or to wear the badge of anti-Semitic attacks if he gets attacked. Mm-hmm. Because the guy, if anybody who knows his politics and know what he's all about, know where his family got their wealth from World War II, by the blood of Jews, Americans, the West, etc. They help fund the Germans. They also help fund the Allied forces. So they made money on both sides, and they're constantly making money on all sides of these conflicts. So it's within his family's DNA to basically be dirty and not have a soul, essentially. And so these people are planning serious evil against the state of Israel because, like I said, this conflict and these continued conflicts, they benefit them. Mm-hmm. And in order to make business, they are willing to sacrifice Israel. They're willing to sacrifice the United States. They're willing to sacrifice Judeo-Christian values, which they care nothing about, and which is essentially what these guys typically will attack, mm-hmm. Besides making financial gains off of these conflicts. And so what you guys call the deep state in America, we have the deep state here, and they're working hand in hand. They're mm-hmm. working together. They're cooperating, and they're essentially, like I said, they are targeting Judeo-Christian values, and they're sick. They are out of their minds. They're demented, and they're so bent on their targeting of, if it's Netanyahu or those who are of the religious in Israel, those who are about holding on to the land of Israel and all of the valued areas, territories, okay, within Judea and Samaria. So 80% of your Bible, for example, 80% of your Bible was written in or talking about the territories within Judea and Samaria, which is what President Obama, Biden, and all of the far left, plus in Israel, want to give away to make and create a Palestinian state. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're going to give away anything in my opinion, that should be the last thing on the chopping block. Because if you give away Judea and Samaria and you give away the heart, which is Jerusalem, you're giving away our biblical right to the land of Israel, which in essence is the only right I have to this land as a Jew, right? And so that's essentially these wars, right, in the background of giving land and pushing Israel to do insane things is what's led to eventually has led to the October 7th attack, has led to the failure of the security services and these demented leaders within the IDF who are trying to make a woke IDF, trying to put women in combat and push all of these agendas. Like you're seeing in the United States, you're trying to see them push it into the SEAL community, into the SAS in England, and all these, tier 1 units, and say, oh, we can have women there too. It's all part of this woke agenda of essentially the results are making a weak military, a weak government, and weak policies that essentially, if the right in Israel, and if conservatives, and if people like myself who hold to these biblical values and Zionism, which is the main reason why we're even here and why we're having this conversation, from this land where I'm at right now, is because of that movement. That's all based on these values. So you erase all of that, we stand on nothing, and so sadly, yeah, that's that's kind of like a long-winded answer, but I think it's important that people understand that there's things in the background that that are constantly at war here, and that's essentially what led to this failure. It led to a huge mess, and so essentially, right now, the one who's allowed this mess to happen, the head of the Aman, which is our IDF intelligence, so head of the intelligence of the IDF. This guy knew of the imminent danger from Gaza, did nothing about it by letting the prime minister know. There were people in the intelligence community who found out, and they attempted to notify the prime minister, and they have been imprisoned, and they have been being prosecuted and being intimidated for sharing this information with the prime minister's office, because they're like, hey, nobody's going to tell the prime minister what the hell, right? You know? And so these younger guys that aren't part of the elite, because essentially what's happened is the far left have created an elitists within the IDF, including the chief of staff, which is the head of the military, that are just anti all of these things I just said, right? And then you have the former Minister of Defense, Bogie Alon, just recently, by the way, who went on national television and declared that we're committing genocide in Gaza. He didn't use the terms, but he alluded to it in his statements. And I'm like, what a scumbag. You were the head of the IDF, the chief of staff. You were the head of the Minister of Defense of Israel years ago. And you're going to throw the IDF, the same uniform you wore and the same oaths that you took, that we all take, okay? And the purity of arms, which is what we carry on us, the 10 commandments of every soldier in the military, the purity of arms, okay? Which John Spencer just published, by the way, on his social media, because he's right now sitting with some of the heads of the IDF, and he's analyzing the war and gathering more intelligence. And in his research, this is the benchmark. This is the foundation of the IDF. And for you, as someone who wore the uniform, who is the chief of the head of the defense ministry, you should have a little bit more respect for your people than to declare that we are capable of genocide. Now, I know what he's doing, like the far left is doing. It's attacking Netanyahu. It's attacking the right. But are you guys blind? Because in your attacks, you're attacking me.
Right.
You're attacking every soldier that has left this family, that have been raped, murdered, mutilated, tortured, burnt to death. Okay? The horrors that we had to see. And what we went to go fight for, scumbag, was not for what you just said.
Right.
We did not commit genocide. I've had hundreds of terrorists go through my hands. I could have murdered and mowed down every one of them. And each one of them deserve a bullet to the face. Okay? But not me or anyone in my group lift a finger on these scumbags. We transported them from Gaza to, which was our mission, to get them to detention in Israel, to get questioning, to get processed, to get intelligence, and to try to find our hostages. We stuck to our mission. Mm-hmm. So that's within the group that I serve, and with every soldier that I came in contact with, which is a very big, large part of the military. It's the paratroopers, it's the armored corps, which is the tanks. It's the combat engineers. It's a lot of the tier 1 units that we've operated with, okay, doing secret missions. So I've had the privilege of being involved in a lot of the IDF campaign in Gaza and in Lebanon, and I have not seen one atrocity against the citizens of where we're fighting in the combat space of where we're fighting in. Right. Quite the opposite. We've endangered our lives in order to carry out our missions, to preserve the life of essentially potential terrorists. Because just because they're wearing civilian clothing doesn't mean anything. Right. Okay. A lot of the terrorists don't wear, in fact, I haven't found not one of the terrorists that we ran into was wearing military clothes.
Yeah, that's the thing about terror. They don't really announce themselves.
Yeah. But imagine for a guy like him to say this. And again, it only strengthens the claim that I've been hearing for over a year now that's made me sick to my stomach. I can't stand it. Dan Bilzerian and all these other morons that go on social media, that go on these big interviews that reach millions of people, okay? You know, that comedian guy from Egypt, I forget his name right now, and so on and so on. You have all these people that know nothing of the conflict. They know nothing at all. They're not here. I'm in it. I'm active in it. I've been attacked. My family had been attacked. And I'm here defending my people and trying to get my hostages back. And that's exactly what we're doing. And for anybody to claim otherwise, not to mention an Israeli, is an absolute, it's a shame.
This episode of the History Lessons podcast is sponsored by Victory Independent Planning. Hey, are you ready to take the stress out of your retirement? At Victory Independent Planning, we put you on the right trajectory with our exclusive VIP retirement glide path. Our smart approach prepares you for what's next by optimizing your sources of savings and income, your medical and healthcare planning, your advanced estate and giving strategies, risk management and investing, and tax planning. Let us help you glide into retirement with confidence. Text GlidePath to 239-567-5477. That's GlidePath, all one word, small letter G, to 239-567-5477, and receive a link to schedule a complimentary consultation. Do it today to start your journey on the VIP retirement glide path, because your future deserves a safe landing. It's interesting because I don't think that, at least from an American perspective, I don't think we realize the amount of division that you're describing amongst the Israeli population. I think we have a tendency to think of it as a fairly, a fairly united us against the world mentality for the Israelis. And it sounds like what you're saying is that may have been true, but things have changed to the point where now what I heard you say was this type of division, this type of political division and societal division has weakened the Israelis to the point where they were attackable on October 7th, where it could be done, and it was done because of that show of weakness. Take me through what that day was like for you. Take me through, if you can, or what it was like to wake up on October 7th and realize what was going on.
Well, so we woke up in the mountains of Jerusalem to explosions all around, which was essentially the Iron Dome trying to infiltrate to engage with these rockets that are being fired at us. So we hear explosions everywhere. The sirens go off. We're running to our shelters. First of all, it's a high holiday, so I'm not on my phone. But because of the situation, I realize, okay, something's wrong. So I open my phone and I go to the group text for my unit, and it is flooded with messages. And I'm like, oh my God, I realized immediately by the amount of messages in the inbox that something serious was happening. And so as I'm trying to wake up and just sift through this long list of texts and then videos of the terrorists that were being shared in the group, so videos of the attack, etc., it was just total madness. And so what I did is I kissed my family goodbye, took my gear, threw it in the car, and just hightailed to base. On my way, I picked up one of my good friends in central Israel, and which was again surreal. As I'm trying to get to his house, there's roadblocks by the police because they're trying to intercept these terrorists that have entered Israel. Now, I know at this point, because I'm looking through the text as I'm driving, that the terrorists were they were disguised as IDF soldiers. And so as I get to these checkpoints, my heart race is just going, over the top. I get my weapon racked and loaded, and I have it in my hand, one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on my weapon, and I'm ready essentially to engage with these people at the checkpoint, these cops, if they're not cops, right? So, and then I see this Ethiopian girl, and I go, thank God, the terrorists don't have Ethiopians. And I'm like, whew, right? And so I, of course, I profile her, and it just lets the pressure off instantly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, thank God. But of course, I'm still on edge because, hey, maybe these guys are holding her hostage. I don't know. Right. So all these things are going through my mind, these contingencies, and, am I going to have to get in a gun battle with anybody as I'm driving? Right. I get to my friend, pick him up, get all his stuff. We go straight to base. We get to base. Black Hawks are flying in and out with soldiers. During the beginning of the war, we started with the paratrooper battalion, the enlisted battalion, not the reservists. So we're a special reservist unit that assists the paratroopers in war. And just months before this war broke out, we actually created our special mobility unit for the paratroopers, who made a special request because essentially, or originally, we were in the 98th Fire Battalion with the main group of guys that do what we do, which is special mobility missions. And so we were with the commando unit and that whole detachment. But just months before, there was a special request. My commander agreed, took some of the guys, we split up, kept guys in our original unit. Some of the guys went to do what we do for the commando unit, and then we went to the paratroopers. So we show up at the paratrooper main base, and so these young kids are getting on Black Hawks, the special reconnaissance unit of the paratroopers, which is their spearhead of their main unit, that are getting on these Black Hawks, and they're hightailing to Gaza. They're hightailing to the Jewish communities that have been attacked. And I think the main area where they were fighting was in the Be'eri area, if I recall. We didn't take part in the gun battles with the terrorists. So we're seeing this whole thing unfold. We're trying to get our Hummers ready, our gear ready, our weapons, and it just takes a very long time. So even though we were one of the first reserve units that showed up and that were all together and ready to go as a unit, we actually had to wait a whole day till we could get to the Gaza area, to the Jewish communities and so on.
It is a universal military maxim to hurry up and wait.
Exactly. And so just huge disappointment, right? You're sitting there we didn't have rooms. So we actually slept, right? Because we're not part of this base. We don't even have our own sleeping quarters on this base, just where we gear up and go and do our missions. And so we're sleeping essentially in the parking lot throughout the night. And so whoever brought gear for that in their go bag, you're good to go. Most of us, we just took the bare essentials because we were trying to hightail to get to engage with the terrorists, right? If our unit gets called up to do that as well. So we're there, wait the whole night. Next morning, we finally get all our, the guys are in charge finally to hand out all of what we need to get us mission ready. And then so we head to the Jewish communities around the Gaza Strip. They got attacked. And what we saw was the aftermath. We saw the aftermath, and of course some of the continued battles that were going on, which we took part in searching for terrorists that were hiding in the communities, and then essentially we finally got the green light about a week in to start to retrieve bodies, and that was essentially our first mission, was body retrievals. But within Israel territory, still within, not in Gaza, yet these were life-threatening missions. Okay, we had an anti-tank unit from Hamas, right? That had essentially they're called Kolnets. So it's like an RPG, but it's guided. So these are Russian. It's a Russian guided missiles, like little RPG style. But like on a joystick kind of thing. So they shoot the thing and then they guide it and try to take you out. So we had a Colnet team trying to basically, they were hunting for us, even though our operations are all in the cloak of darkness and so on. And my team is a team of very senior guys with lots of experience. So even though we were very professional, very tactical, however you want to call it, these guys, we got intel that they were on us, right? So these guys were really good. I mean, they were, they were ready for the IDF, right? They were ready. And I think because the initiative, we kind of lost that initiative, the initial initiative. Had we gone in that same day and sent in the IDF to start to retrieve the hostages, in a very massive and very brutal attack, I think we would not be having this conversation we're having right now, where this war is continuing, at least in Gaza. I think we would have been in a completely different place. But unfortunately, it turned out to be a very long, drawn-out war, and very slow, methodical, and essentially it also led to what led to a lot of the slowness in our operations is the U.S. pressure and the U.S. halting us over and over again. Since December of last year was the first time I remember we just came to a screeching halt. Like, we had the momentum finally after 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden we came to a screeching halt, come December. And I was like, what are we doing? We're just sitting there in the rain and the cold, miserable, waiting for the next orders. And it's like, the White House is basically putting pressure on us. They're not giving us munitions that we need. They're not giving us, what is actually agreed upon. It's part of the deals that were brokered with us post the 6-Day War.
Right.
And unfortunately, this government has done everything in its power to not honor those agreements in time of war, which is because Israel had its own munitions factories and warehouses back in the 80s, 90s, whatever, right? So we've had our own industry, and the prime minister at the time, Ehud Barak, he had this genius idea that we broker a deal that's part of the defense deal that we have from the post Six-Day War deal with Egypt and so on, which is essentially the part of the deal that the United States brokered, is that they would help us with, I think it's like $4 billion a year towards our defense budget to help basically keep us at a military advantage and have an edge with our enemies being Egypt, Jordan, Syria, what have you. And then, of course, that deal kind of morphed throughout the years, and it led to one point with Ehud Barak, who said, hey, we don't need all these storehouses. We don't need all the, we need a smaller military, more professional, less whatever. And, we'll just, we trust the Americans, they'll provide to us when we need it. And we'll instead put all of that budget into brokering or into developing technological advancements with our militaries in our intel and in our whatever, and we'll invest in that the Americans can benefit from. And then when war breaks out or whatever, and we need munitions, then they'll just send it to us, and we're good to go, right? Yeah, if America was a true ally, through and through, no matter if it's left, right politics, then yeah, that would be great. But that didn't happen.
Yep. Yeah, I think we've learned over the last few years that supply chains are important. And when you give up your supply chain, you potentially give up a fair amount of ability to react on your own timeline. What's it like there now?
Well, very quiet.
Too quiet?
Yeah, too quiet. Listen, it's been really nice to finally have quiet after this ceasefire deal with Lebanon. So, yeah, I mean, it's been nice to have the quiet, but, and here's the big but, we haven't achieved our military objectives in Lebanon, which, according to the generals, is that we're supposed to reach the Litani. The Litani is a geographical border between Lebanon and Israel, but it's within Lebanon territory. I forget exactly how many kilometers from our now standing border, but essentially our goal was to reach the Litani so that we can have a defensible border between us and Lebanon, and to eliminate the future threat from an October 7th attempt on the northern communities.
Right.
One thing that I don't think has gone out to the public is that Hezbollah and the Radwan units, which at the time I knew about them, all this stuff, we've known about them for years, but I haven't been able to talk about them because it hasn't been public knowledge. Mm-hmm. But now that it's been declassified, if you will, by the media, I'm able to talk about them. You have what's known as the Radwan units. These are your tip of the spear of the Hezbollah terrorists. And these guys are essentially like a SEAL team equipped as far as their equipment, their gear, their weaponry, their night vision, silencers, the type of weapon, etc. It is like on the level of a SEAL team platoon. Okay?
Full badass kit.
Full badass kit. And so they're completely kitted out. They are highly trained, and their main mission, right, is to infiltrate Israel and to carry out on October 7th mass murder and hostage taking from northern communities that are vulnerable, that are close to the border with Lebanon. By miracle, by absolute miracle, they did not carry out their attack. Had they participated on October 7th, we would be in a completely different place right now. Yep. We would have had hundreds, in my opinion, like hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens butchered, murdered, and who knows how many thousands held hostage in Lebanon.
And we still don't know why that didn't happen, right?
I say by total miracle. To me, that's the hand
Yeah.
of God. There is no physical, there's no rational reason. Why the hell would these guys not do that? We were vulnerable. We
Yeah.
were in chaos. You see what's happening in the South. You see how the IDF is handling, a bunch of, both terrorists, but a bunch of just civilians that are they're just running around on a rampage.
Yep.
Okay. So these aren't highly trained people. And look at what they were able to do. I mean, you have to be an absolute moron to not engage, to not take that golden opportunity that you're being given.
Yeah.
And they didn't. And they've been training for years. They've been planning for it. I know some good friends of mine who are in our, like I said, in our Shaita Schlossle, in our SEAL community, and in other Tier 1 units. They did engage with some of these Radwan units. So there were certain attempts. So some guys did try. Some teams did try to carry out an attack, but it wasn't on full scale. So we were able to thwart those threats, take them out, and pinpoint and eliminate those threats. But like I said, by total miracle, it had those guys, unify in a uniform way, and the way they've been planning, the way they've been training, had carried out their mission, we would have been in a very, very horrible place. Very horrible place. And so to me, it's just the hand of God. There's no other reason. There's no other reason why they didn't do what they did.
Got a couple minutes left. I wanted to just ask you about some of your projects. Talk to me about the I Am Israel film project, and maybe a little bit about your podcast as well.
We've been working on the I Am Israel sequel with a producer and director named David Kern. He's a really, really great Christian film director and filmmaker that has also worked on Hollywood films, and he just is a wealth has a wealth of talent. I mean, he's just so talented, really creative. And I met him through mutual friends of ours, a group called Hayovel, that have volunteers who volunteer in Judea, Samaria, to help pick grapes for the Jewish farmers, to help basically counter terrorist attacks and terrorist threats against these farmers. From instead of hiring the Arabs from the Palestinian communities that will be threatened by these terrorist groups to carry out attacks on the Jews, just to understand the dynamics there.
Yep.
I'm not saying that every Palestinian is a bad guy, but that was and still is an issue for the Jewish communities that want to hire these people.
Right.
Because a lot of Palestinians work for Jewish farms and factories and so on. So this Christian organization decided to send volunteers to Israel during the harvest season and the pruning season within the grapevines in Judea and Samaria. So they helped on the first film, the first I Am Israel film, and they called me and said, "Hey, would you like to see this trailer? And a good friend of ours is making this wonderful film that we helped them with, and we would like to we'd like to meet you, and we can sit and we can watch this trailer and so on and so forth and meet the director." I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So I go out there with my father-in-law, and we meet the director. He shows us the trailer with a few other individuals, and we're just like, "Wow, that's a great film. What an awesome film. It is so positive. It's so uplifting. It overlooks all of the conflict and the politics and everything that's going on in Israel. And it just looks at Israel from the way I would say is from the eyes of God, the way God sees this land. If you look at the Bible and scripture and the way God talks about this land, it's his land. It's a holy land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a blessed land, right? It's like looking at Israel through David's lens, okay?
Right.
is essentially him showcasing the land of Israel from God's perspective, which is a very positive and just in such a wonderful way. And I was just blown away. I was like, man, that is amazing. And so for a few years, I was looking for someone to make a film to highlight the Temple Mount and to talk about the Temple Mount from that same angle. And I tried to talk to other film guys, and it flopped. Things didn't work out for years. And so I'm just like, this would be great if we had a film like this on the Temple Mount. And he just looked at me and was like, like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't think you're understanding this project kind of thing,
right.
And I could tell he was probably, somewhat, maybe even, offended, because it's just like, can we just like look at this film from what it is and for, which is, just highlighting Israel and the beauty of the land of Israel and through also telling personal stories and highlighting different Jewish characters. And after a few years, we'd been in contact. He had helped assist me in what essentially was the beginning of what led me to podcasting, is where we did a show where we basically interviewed experts, archaeological experts, historical guys, what have you, on the issue of the Temple Mount. And so he helped me with the setup. He helped me with some film guys, and we just kept in contact, right? And he kept, he was promoting what I was doing. He was supporting what I was doing. And then eventually he got the script for what I kind of threw at him as this, like, shoot from the hip, like, this would be a great film if we had something like this for the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
And he goes, hey, Doron, he says, I have a script for the I Am Israel sequel, and I actually want to make it to where the main focal point of the film is leading towards the Temple Mount. And essentially the way we're telling the story is we're following the glory that came down at Mount Sinai, and we're following it with the tabernacle and the Israelites through the land of Israel, where they were at Gilgal, where they were at Joshua's altar, where they were at Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood for 369 years. The glory of God was there. And then essentially the glory of God continues and then finds its final resting place on the Temple Mount. And then essentially the point is, the reason why the Temple Mount, to me and to these Jewish people and to Christians should be as well, why it should be an important place, is because this is where God chose, through David, to establish his holy space in all of the universe.
Yeah.
And that we are to ascend and we are to pray and we are to worship God through. And that through this medium that God created, he hears our prayer. It goes directly to heaven, right? And so that's essentially what we're highlighting at the end, is where at the end of the film, you get the idea that this is the final resting place of God's glory. And this is where the temple was built, where the glory was and then departed, but also says is the glory of God's coming back in the end times when Messiah comes, and so on and so forth. So essentially, we're just talking about that without talking about the conflict, without talking about, all the mess around it, which was really my vision for many years, is there has to be a film that can talk about this most holy place and not get stuck in the mud of the noise, the surround noise.
Yeah.
Because that's all it is. To me, that's what it is. Right.
Well, do me a favor, will you?
Yeah.
Will you come back and let's just talk about the history when the movie drops? Can we do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, man. Absolutely riveting stuff. Please stay in touch. I would love to have you back to talk specifically about the history behind this film in the future. And good luck over there, and stay safe.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
For me, there's really only one lesson for the modern investor from the attacks of October 7th, 2023, and it is an essential one, and that is to expect the unexpected. Ladies and gentlemen, the attack on Israel last October serves as a stark reminder of how swiftly and profoundly life can change when the unexpected strikes, often in tragic ways. For investors, it's a metaphor for the financial markets, a compelling lesson that uncertainty isn't a question of if, but when. The ability to anticipate and prepare for such unpredictability isn't merely prudent, it's essential for long-term success. History and experience have taught us that financial markets are not immune to black swan events, those rare, unpredictable, and highly impactful occurrences like economic crashes, geopolitical conflicts, technological disruptions, or natural disasters. These events disrupt our assumptions, erode our confidence, and can spark widespread panic. And while we can't predict these events in detail, we can take steps to mitigate their impact through preparation and planning. Diversification remains the cornerstone of such preparation. By spreading investments across various asset classes, you can reduce exposure to sector-specific risks, ensuring that no single adverse event derails your entire portfolio. Geographic diversification further bolsters that resilience, protecting your investments from potential regional instability. An adequate emergency fund is equally critical. This financial cushion not only ensures liquidity during turbulent times, but it also helps you avoid panic-driven decisions when markets are volatile. It's your safety net, giving you peace of mind while navigating uncertainty. Hedging strategies such as options, treasury bills, or defensive stocks provide another layer of potential protection. These tools help offset losses in riskier investments, offering stability when markets falter. The extent of their use depends highly on your individual risk tolerance and your willingness to accept potential losses. Beyond technical strategies, adaptability is key. Just as nations pivot in response to crises, investors must remain agile, ready to reassess and adjust their plans when circumstances change. Staying informed, reviewing portfolio allocations, and consulting with trusted advisors like me are crucial steps in aligning strategies with personal goals and evolving market realities. Any sneak attack, be it October 7th, September 11th, or December 7th, is a tragic example of the consequences of underestimating risks and neglecting contingency planning. As investors, we must regularly assess potential vulnerabilities, stress test our portfolios, and prepare for worst-case scenarios. Understanding your risk tolerance, having an exit strategy, and safeguarding against the unforeseen is vital to your financial security. Ultimately, preparing for the unexpected isn't about predicting every possible event. It's about creating a framework that anticipates uncertainty, fosters your resilience, and enables eventual recovery. In the investment world, occasional losses are inevitable. But what matters most is winning the war, securing your financial future despite the battles along the way. Well, my fellow historians, that is all for this episode. Be sure to check out Doron's work, including the I Am Israel project and the upcoming sequel. You can find all the links at doronkeidar.com. And while you're surfing the web, check me out on Amazon. That's where the book is, History Lessons for the Modern Investor. And be sure to do all the social stuff with us, like this episode. Follow us wherever you see or hear your podcasts, because we're available on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Until next, nice. Until next time, we'll take another rollicking romp through the past and make an investment in your future with history lessons for the modern investor. Goodbye, everybody.